Good morning and welcome. Thank you for registering for our 8th webinar being delivered through this coronavirus pandemic. It's 10 a.m. in the UK on Wednesday, the 24th of June. My name's Michael Hayward and I'm a member of the board of HOSPA, the Hospitality Professionals Association, and a member of the Institute of Hospitality. As the situation for our industry is changing rapidly, let me briefly set the scene. Yesterday, we had confirmation from the Prime Minister that from the 4th of July, that's Saturday next week, businesses including hotels, self-contained accommodation, restaurants, cafes, cinemas, hair salons, what a relief, outdoor gyms and tourism attractions may reopen as long as proper safety protocols are maintained. The details of these protocols are just coming out today and more to come in the coming days. Furthermore, people may maintain a 1 metre social distancing wherever 2 metres is not possible, provided additional mitigating measures. Clearly, this changes how we plan for the reopening of the hospitality businesses, and many of the public are not entirely comfortable with these rapid changes. According to the Visit Britain Consumer Weekly Tracker survey last week, only 23% of Britons are confident that they would be able to take a UK short break holiday in August, building to 40% for September. So as we begin to understand what the post-COVID world looks like, one thing is for certain: the needs for future travellers have changed. Health and safety will be top of mind for many when it comes to booking accommodation, and the procedures to ease these concerns will ultimately make or break our guests' experiences. To address all these issues, I am delighted to be joined today by our HOSPA CEO, Jane Pendlebury. Welcome.
Hello.
Along with the Chief Executive of the Institute of Hospitality, Peter Duncan. Good morning.
Good morning.
And Duncan Osborn, Regional President, UK and Ireland Hospitality of Amadeus. We will be opening up to questions from the audience following the presentation as time permits. So feel free to use the questions tab on your GoToWebinar app. Thank you all for joining us. I do hope the next 60 minutes will be beneficial to you all. I'm now going to hand over to Duncan Osborn to get the ball rolling.
Right, thank you, Michael. So good morning, everyone, and a pleasure to be here to spend a bit of time with you going through this webinar today. Really appreciate you sparing the time to come and join and listen to us, ask us questions that you want to ask as well, and we're all excited to be here. So today we want to cover 5 different areas. So number 1 is new traveller expectations. Number 2, some key takeaways to look at for you. Number 3 would be industry insights. We'll go through some of those at the moment and see what's occurring in the industry, which is very interesting to look at. A Q&A session. I know some of you have submitted questions already, which is great, and thank you for those. And then we'll look at just a brief cover of the playbooks and recovery resources we have available via HOSPA, IOH, and Amadeus as well. So without further ado, we'll jump into this. So new traveller expectations post COVID-19. As Michael was saying, there are fast-moving changes within the industry at the moment, which is it's partially expected, but it's been a hell show for the last 4 months. Very, very different experience for all of us. Traveller expectations obviously have changed rapidly through that time, and what we need to do is be ready to welcome our travellers back post this COVID period, or during the end of the COVID period, and make sure we have measures in place to meet those particular requirements. So as part of this, we wanted to sort of understand staff and guest needs properly. And to do this, we looked at what's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which illustrates how human beings intrinsically participate in behaviour in a pretty distinct pattern. What that means is some needs have to be met before others are even considered by a particular person. So we all go through a process of ensuring our own safety, etc., etc. So to look at this, first of all, the physiological and safety requirements that people have and what we consider basic needs. And these are things like, the simple items of life: food, water, rest, security, safety, sleep, all those kind of areas that we need to exist on a day-to-day basis. And we look at these as physiological requirements and safety requirements. So cleanliness obviously will cover all of these areas, of course, but for those basic needs of safety, security, and cleanliness, we've got new, very, very different elevated expectations, I beg your pardon, that we now need to meet across the range of our different guests that we have. People's requirements are extremely different. But in the human sort of psyche as such, there are also then psychological needs, which are things like feeling of love and belonging, self-esteem. And the belongingness is also, this isn't just about guests, actually. This is all about our staff as well and our teams in the businesses that we have. We want to build with our teams, we want to build a real sort of team spirit to make sure that each individual member of our teams is feeling as though they belong, they're welcome to be part of that team, they have their requirements met as well, not for their own personal safety, so it's not just about the guest. So we need to make sure that we look at the staff and the guests in an equal basis as well. Physiological needs, the belongingness that people have, that they're welcome to actually be somewhere. People have been away from extended family and friends, and this, that sort of human connection outside of direct family for such a long time, that's a massive requirement for people to be able to feel safe within that environment, and that they're wanted there. They are welcome, very welcome. Welcome back is a phrase that we want to see hotels using quite a lot, and making sure that guests feel comfortable coming back in the, things to look at for these kind of areas are stuff like, we know loyalty programs offer complimentary upgrades if people have a certain level of loyalty. Maybe we should consider offering complimentary upgrades just as almost a standard for a period of time, that, if guests are coming in, they want to feel special. And if they're given a complimentary upgrade without any warning that's coming, it's a nice feeling. It really is. A digital welcome message on getting into the bedroom. There's just small little things like this that we should definitely consider as part of that psychological needs status. And then the self-fulfillment as well, which is, this is where trust has been built. So esteem will be fulfilled once a guest is in a place where a high level of service and personalization can be delivered. It does take the guest to trust us to be able to deliver that properly, and for those guests to come back and remain loyal to us. So we have an awful lot of cleanliness procedures we need to put in place to ensure guests trust that we have cleaned properties and venues properly, cleaned guest rooms properly, public areas, etc., etc. There's an awful lot of standards that we need to adhere to that are new. I know we're a very clean industry normally, but obviously the guests need to see much more of that. And our staff need to trust it as well. So for them to feel trust within us as managers, owners, senior members of teams, the staff definitely need to feel as though that they are definitely part of the team. They trust people who have employed them, who are looking after them, and they're given the right equipment to do their job properly. So that trust is what this is all about. So I could go on about Maslow's hierarchy of needs for quite some time. I've already had the opportunity to do so. It's a very interesting subject, but we do have information on this in terms of an ebook that we will mention later on as well, that goes into quite a lot more detail around this particular area. But just going quickly through it again, physiological needs and safety needs are very much basic. Those have to be met once a guest's arriving at the hotel. Once the staff team members are turning up at the hotel, those needs need to be met straight away. The love and belonging and esteem side of things, that's all psychological. That's making the guest feel extremely welcome, making the team members feel extremely welcome, giving them a sense of, hey, you're part of our team, you're part of our family. Making sure they're really feeling that it's vitally important. And from that, we then build the trust, which is the self-actualization part of this pyramid that you see. So guest needs have changed. Yes, of course they have. But their requirements are different. But the actual core human requirement is to generate trust in where they're staying, in where they spend their money as such, and trust that they are receiving the service and the hygiene and the cleanliness and the security and safety that we can offer them. Again, so there is an ebook on this that goes into a bit more detail, but it's a really interesting subject. So some takeaways that your hotel can implement to reassure guests from arrival to departure. It's it's a whole different process from today. It really is. You know, as Michael said, we're reopening on the 4th of July, and that's great. It really is. But there are strict requirements in place that we need to look at by department. So to plan for this recovery, we need to take into mind an awful lot of different areas, an awful lot of procedures, making sure that, you know, different departments know their routines, know what they're expected to do, know the requirements and safety areas around chemicals that are used in cleaning, etc. So just to look at this by different areas, I've got 8 different areas to cover here, but staff safety is obviously number one. That's, you know, what safeguards should us as hoteliers provide to ensure employee safety. It's vital to have the staff feeling as though they can come in, they're safe at work, then they can do their job safely and get home in the same state they came into work, if not a happier state. But this all starts with advising staff and guests to follow the most basic practices, I beg your pardon, such as hand washing, you know, a lack of physical contact. If a member of staff feels unwell, stay home, don't come into work. That's okay. It's not a bad thing to stay at home if you're not feeling well. You don't want to bring in anything that could infect other members of the team as well. To achieve all this, obviously, we need appropriate training and ensuring that's repeated as well. So there needs to be a training schedule in place to make sure that staff are fully aware of why we're putting these different procedures in place, what they mean for the members of staff, what they mean for the guests, and what they mean for their wider team as a whole. So there's a sort of a training module that needs to be put in place, but it will need to be repeated on maybe a fortnightly basis to start with, or even weekly, just to ensure that everyone's understanding why they're having to do certain different things. There are so many changes around for this hospitality recovery that need to be met, so many challenges that need to be met, that I think the training is paramount to ensuring we can move forward properly. Front of house, it's clearly the first point on which our guest is coming into our properties, our venues, and it's vital. You know, a friendly smile, a welcome back attitude, a thank goodness you're here, thank you so much for coming back to us, we're happy you're here. That attitude on greeting a guest when they come in is vital. Now, that can be just a hand over the heart, a big smile, you know, it's a friendly greeting, eye contact, etc. We're very aware that there needs to be a very much a decrease in personal contact, of course. So contactless guest engagement is vital. So technology is a big part of this. Things like, you know, keyless entry to rooms, check-in via apps. These are all things that are available now on mobiles. As part of some of the larger hotels and chains have this as a standard, but these things are available for you to use. You know, checking in via an app is great. It makes it a much smoother process. It avoids checking queues. It avoids people having to stand in groups, etc. So these are all vital parts of the front of house area. So technology, yes, is key. Personal attitude is really vital as well. Then there's another area to look at here, which is how the actual front of house is set out. Yeah, and things will be different for when guests check in, such as potentially temperature checks on check-in. These are going to be unusual practices for a while. It will become the new norm, of course, but it's just going to be different for people. But also the setup of our front of house areas needs to be different as well. So having social distancing of furniture, for example, and ensuring they're 1 metre plus apart, each chair is 1 metre plus apart, but ensuring cleanliness is really visible as well. So things like door handles, windows, all being cleaned and being seen to be cleaned by members of staff. Any surfaces that people come in contact with regularly cleaned, and these need to be seen by our guests on check-in as well. So it builds the trust elements all the way through. Furniture social distancing makes absolute sense, but it's also things like removing items that we would normally have on display, such as pens or flowers or whatever it would be. These are items that aren't necessary in this kind of period that we've got, whereby they can just be removed, removing the risk of infection, the risk of any contact with people. If you think about a pen, it's something that's picked up by everyone who comes into a hotel just to play with, or to actually write stuff with, or sign their checking card, etc., etc. Those things would just need to be removed and taken away from any contact with people. It sounds basic, but it's just stuff that needs to be thought about. And then PPE for staff as well. Face masks, etc. They're going to be vital. So these would need to be provided. And the people see them, and they see the hotels taking advantage of the situation seriously. Housekeeping in a generation clean era. It's absolutely vital. Meticulous cleaning procedures are vital to meet new expectations of our guests. And they need to be seen, otherwise it's not noticed. So you need visible cleaning going on around the front of the house, as I was saying, but hand sanitizers would need to be in place. Things in place to be able to give guests the ability to wipe down areas while they sit down. Elements like that means we're taking the cleaning and disinfecting very, very seriously. So disinfection process and procedures are vital. Consistent checks and training required for all our teams as well. There are many action steps you can take to cover this area, such as a review of your current housekeeping procedures, identifying surfaces that need to be cleaned in a room, in a public area, in a corridor, even within the staff areas as well. These all need to be itemised and checked on a regular basis and cleaned on a very regular basis. Removal of non-essential items from rooms and public areas. As I said, flowers and pens out in public areas, but in rooms, things like, moisturiser dispensers or whatever that would be, but also paper materials, menus or pamphlets for local facilities and that sort of thing need to be removed from rooms so they're not just being touched on a daily basis. It needs to be ensured that the room looks as clean as possible when you walk in. So it's a vital area to be covered. Maintenance and engineering. So the value of the infrastructure needs to very much be maintained, but reducing health risks at the time. This is things like ventilation equipment, replacing filters on an extremely regular basis, not just the way we have been doing. Humidity checks, making sure the building isn't too humid because that promotes the virus potentially. Regular inspections, as I said, but it's also looking at energy cost control. So if there are areas of the hotel, such as the spas aren't allowed to open at the moment and won't be allowed to for some time that we've been told, but those sort of areas can then be almost shut down. There are still obviously machines that need to be in operation, pools need to maintain their levels of cleanliness, etc., whilst they're shut down, but the rest of the areas can be closed off. What it means is you're then saving energy. And I mentioned earlier about potentially closing guest room floors during these lower levels of occupancy. That saves a huge amount of energy as well. So there's a great deal of stuff that you can look at across these. Next ones to look at are the guest rooms. I've mentioned these already, but it's an extremely personal setting. So for a guest to come into a room, they need to be able to see that there are things like single-use toiletries, mini hand sanitizers, healthy minibar offerings. There's no printed material, as I mentioned, lying around in the room. And for things like room service, they have the ability to order via a digital offering or a mobile offering that they can order room service, order extra, if they need additional pillows, then great, they can order those as well. But even things like removal of additional pillows from rooms when guests check in is another sign that cleanliness is really being considered. There are other vital areas, of course. F&B is one that we really, really need to be careful about, and are very, very keen to get this right, of course. So menus and dining touch points are being completely rethought. Safety, cleanliness, and social distancing are absolutely key within the food and beverage area. Visible cues should be in place, such as chefs and kitchen teams wearing PPE, regular wiping down the tables, chairs. But this all needs to be extremely visible as well, giving the guests the equipment to be able to wipe down their own tables and chairs. Things like cutlery, etc., needs to be considered very deeply as well. Glassware, what's going to be right for the guests. I think if we're in a green society, having one-use cups and that sort of thing is perhaps not the right way to go, but there needs to be these sort of discussions had and decisions made about the best way to utilise all of those. Because essentially, peace of mind is the key here. People will come back if they have a good experience and they come away that they felt safe, they felt secure, they felt it's been extremely clean, they've had a good simple offering on menus, of course, but they've had a decent experience with you. Ensuring that peace of mind is all about making sure that the cleanliness is visible and people trust that they can come into that particular part of the environment. Room service is a huge part of this. I mentioned that a second ago. Looking at, is it just the room service is a knock and leave outside the door situation? Yes, that will certainly help without having people coming into the room and having to get a check signed to say they've had their room service. So there's a guest trust element that's built in there as well. Room service offerings need to be looked at in terms of what kinds of menus do we want to be offering to people. And then there's other areas that should be looked at as well, such as, outside areas. If you're lucky enough as a hotel or a venue to have outside areas, then they should be utilised and, maximise their usage of it. We've seen pictures of some of the places outside of the UK that have opened up where they've got, almost glass cabinets that people can sit in, or even very sensible social distancing measures put in place. Some have even got, I think I've seen hats with swimming goggles on them to make sure people were 2 metres apart. So there's a lot of things that people have been quite inventive about. But I think utilising outside areas will just create much more of a space for you as hotel owners, hotel managers, to be able to utilise and give that offering to your guests as well. And then other things to think about, like designated entrance and exit points to restaurants, to beverage outlets, food and beverage outlets. If they're going in one way, they have to come out another. So you're just removing that guest contact as much as physically possible. Spa areas, again, we mentioned this a second ago, that people very much want to return to spas. That pampering feeling is something that people are really looking forward to getting, but to be able to offer that properly, we need to provide the correct equipment, UV lighting, etc. But look at things like greeting protocols. How do we say hi to people coming into a spa? It's a very touchy-feely environment. So the offerings that we have need to be looked at. If you have 4 hand massages, maybe that should just be 2, and then the PPE equipment that's in place for the staff to be able to provide those massages and guests to be able to go through them. That's got to be considered as well. And again, within the ebooks that we'll talk about later, we've got some really good tips on how to manage all of these different areas too. Surface cleansing, of course, in spas is vital as well. It needs to be soon. And then the last on this is meetings and events. What do future events look like? Who knows? It's going to be very different. It's, we're all used to having large gatherings of people all drinking together, eating together, having a buffet. Providing AV equipment that people can just go and touch and utilise and play with, and it's a very different world that's coming. So we need to look at re-evaluation of our AV equipment. Is it suitable? Is it something that can be transported in and there's non-contact with guests? Flip charts, maybe they're not something we can use at the moment. These are all considerations we need to look at. With the reimagination of larger spaces that we have in hotels or venues, even outdoor spaces for meetings and events. You can see the picture here, the outside of a pool is a great place to have a social event. But it's got to be reimagined in how we keep people apart and how we set those out as well. It does mean smaller numbers as a maximum capacity in conference and meeting rooms. We know that, but at least they're starting to get utilised. We've done polls recently where we've gone to customers who cancelled events or postponed events in 2020. And nearly 50% of them have said they actually want to rebook in 2020, not go into 2021. And that's huge. It means the market's out there, that the potential revenue is there to grab. It's not going to be, we're not going to hit targets we'd hoped from January we would achieve in 2020, but at least it gives us, a bit of scope to play with and some customers to go out to go for as well. So it's all about client trust. It's a big decision for these customers to come back to the meeting events side of the business. It really is. We need to give them the ability to trust us to provide that. So what are we seeing at the moment? So I've got some slides here. These are all from our Demand 360 tool, and I'll nip through these fairly quickly because there's a lot of numbers on them, but it does show an interesting pattern. So this first one is net hotel booking activity across the UK in 2020. You'll see January was pretty healthy actually. We've got over nearly 700,000 hotel bookings. That first week of January, it starts to drop off a little bit, and then February and March, it's just, wow, what a massive drop. We saw the industry get almost completely killed, which has been very, very sad, of course, but that turnaround was huge. And to see these sort of negative numbers that we've got here of, 377,000 rooms cancelled in 1 week, 340 the next, etc. But what we started to see is that's flattened off. Of course, it would do anyway because people have cancelled their rooms. But we're starting to see a positive. In January, in last week, I think that is, or maybe the week before last, 241,000 hotel bookings are made. Well, sorry, 24.1 thousand hotel bookings are made. So that's a positive. We're starting to see a turnaround in the business. So it will be slow, of course it will, but it's just good to see some business start to come back. Occupancy by market segment for the next 90 days. There's different markets here. Also, you've got group current, discounted, negotiated rates, retail and wholesale. We can say group current, a lot of that's down to key workers potentially, but at least at least it's business that we've got and people are staying with us. Discounted business, there's a level of it. These aren't great percentages, but you can see the split amongst these. So retail is small, but yeah, we'll see how that comes across in the next 3 months. But this is the picture we have at the moment. So it's showing short lead, it really is. So that's the week of June the 14th. This is this week, and these stats were taken 2 weeks ago. So they will have changed slightly, but it does show that the short lead business is coming. And I only think with Boris's announcement yesterday, that's going to get better. So let's same time last average occupancy pickup for the future stay date window. What we're looking at is just where the business is coming from here. So you'll see direct is in the 0 to 7 day window is the biggest provider for us. You've then got the central reservation business, GDS, total transient business, and OTA is small. That's understandable at the moment. Brand.com is also small. I think people are waiting to really trust that we're going to be open properly to start booking that again. But you get to see a bit more of a pattern of the business that's going to come back to us. This is net hotel booking activity across London, so not just the UK, but again, it shows the same sort of pattern. And it does show we've got nearly 10,000 bookings in the week of the 7th of June into London hotels. It's not huge. You compare it to the first week of January, which is generally pretty slow, 290,000, I think that is. It's a long way to go before the market's coming back, but we are starting to see positives, and it's just nice to see. So I just want to run through those slides with you and just have give you a little bit of a look at them. We've got a lot more detail we can go into. I'm not a data guru personally, but if you want to go into that data in more detail, then reach out to us, just to give me a shout, and I can certainly introduce you to the wizards on the data that we have in our business, and we can go through that in much more detail with you. So that kind of finishes off the slides I've got. I think Michael, I think time-wise I'm okay, and where we expected to be. So I'll lend it over to you now.
Fantastic, thank you, Duncan. I'll invite Jane and Peter to come back onto the microphones and camera there. And just going into a few questions before I do launch into those, can I ask you for some insights that you've had on the industry and preparedness and where we're at? And just before I do that, to clarify, the announcements from Boris Johnson and the timings and all of that relates to England. It is different for the devolved nations in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. So thank you, Heather, for the little reminder on that. Perhaps, Jane, if you'd like to start us off with some insights.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Duncan. It was very interesting what you were saying there, Duncan, about loyalty and being just as important for staff as it is for our guests. And I think intrinsically, as hospitality people, we all know that, but it's really nice to hear it said out loud that the majority of us are very good at looking after our staff, and that will reap rewards further down the line. The one thing that I have really found, I've probably in the last 24 hours or less since the announcements yesterday, is that there's a very positive attitude towards hospitality. I think those outside our industry are beginning to appreciate that we are a really thriving industry, that we need their support, and that they want us to be there and to be successful. We're no longer taken for granted as an industry. And I think also as an industry, we can prove, it's our opportunity now to prove to government that we're not to be taken for granted and that we are a massive contributor to the UK economy. So I think the positivity, we've just got to grasp that. We've got to do what we do best, get out there and serve the public.
Fantastic, thanks for that, Jane. Peter, your thoughts?
Well, I totally agree with everything Jane said, and I do think that in terms of the reputation of hospitality, both in terms of recognising its importance to the community as a whole, and also as a viable career in a very thriving industry, is ours for the taking at the moment. If we handle this right, we can do an enormous amount in terms of improving the image of hospitality, which I think we all know from within it we've always felt is undervalued. I think one of my concerns is Duncan was very clear talking about the need to ensure staff safety, the need to get staff feeling confident to be with us. The challenge we have in that is that at the same time as we're bringing people back to work, there is still an enormous threat of unemployment and redundancy over a lot of roles, because with occupancies going to be the way we think they're going to be, there will be no doubt that headcount is going to have to drop in many properties and in corporate offices of hotels as well, and other hospitality businesses. Now, what I would advocate is the only way to mitigate that concern, and I think people are going to have some very real concerns about job security, is businesses must be completely transparent about how they see it, how they're handling it, and handle it properly. If they try and do things sneakily or improperly, or, you know, don't handle it so that staff have confidence that they're being treated fairly, then that confidence is going to go, and if that goes, that really impacts on every level of service. I think one of the key areas is going to be the new market norm is going to be people want to buy security, they want to buy safety, and if they're coming into your establishment, whether it's a hotel or a restaurant or a bar, they're not going to come if they don't feel they're going to be safe. There's an awful lot of advice about this. And the interesting thing is we've spent the last few years managing all single-use plastic out of our businesses, and we're now bringing it back in at a rate of knots. So you know, the squeezy bottle on the shower wall and reusable stuff, you know, is back, is out of vogue, and cling film is back in the kitchen big time, isn't it? My goodness, or will be. So I think we're going to have to address that long term. How do we handle that? It's going to be a very interesting few weeks. I think it's encouraging to see those figures that Duncan was giving about reservations activity, because obviously that's the first driver we can look at, isn't it? And anecdotally, I'm sure we've all been talking to friends on our Zoom quizzes during lockdown and all the rest of it. And outside our industry, there is a tremendous pent-up demand just to get out and be there and do something normal. And for a lot of us, doing something normal is going to the pub, going out for a meal, having a weekend break, having a few days away. I think there's going to be a massive pent-up demand that we're going to be hopefully pleasantly surprised at. I do worry particularly about the meetings and events sector, because I think international meetings are a long way away from starting again, and they are amongst the most lucrative sector within the meetings industry. And I think that there's a lot of spare capacity in offices now, so meeting space is going to be created there, which is what we saw happen in previous recessions. And also, I think that companies are going to be using this technology much more than before. I think we've kind of we've zoomed forward 10 years, if I can put it that way, in terms of we're all much more comfortable using this. It's better, it works, saves all that travel. I mean, so many companies have got big travel bans forecast for as long as they can see into the future, I think, partly because of budgeting, partly because of staff security. Company travel, particularly, companies are so worried about the security of their people who travel, people who attend meetings. I think that's going to be the big factor. But really, the more we can build confidence in what we're doing, in the fact that we're managing our staff properly, the better. Those are my insights.
Thanks for that, Peter. We've had some great questions coming through. One of them that came before our session was from Diane at Manchester Metropolitan University. She's asking on behalf of students graduating with hospitality degrees and their concerns over their short-term immediate career prospects. Perhaps, Peter, I think you've got something to suggest on that one.
Well, the first thing I have to suggest is that we've got a website running specifically for people graduating this year. We've got a webinar running at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I've spoken to a lot of people who are graduating this year. I do some mentoring, and my mentees have been bending my ear. My mentee from last year has just told me yesterday that he's just lost his job. For so long, I've been saying this is a wonderful time to be entering the industry. All of the projections are heading north. Everything's good. That's all changed. It's a tough time, and they're going to find it very hard to find a job. But Duncan, I'm sure, has better sort of foresight into the future, but I do believe that there's been such a long-term trend of growth that when we have confidence to travel again, it will again be a good career. And we're worried about the fact that hospitality is going to be a lousy place for graduates this year. So's everywhere else. There is no sector of the economy that has been spared from this. And you know, I would just say to the students who want to come into hospitality, stick with that ambition, because medium term there will be great careers here. But I say there's tips around and there's things on our website. I'm sure Jane on the HOSPA site of things for graduates as well. Stick with it, and the right time will come. That's the only advice I can give. Jane,
something we can add to that. We've seen an awful lot of entrepreneurial activity and attitudes and flexibility from existing hospitality businesses. So now's an opportunity for those soon to become fully fledged in our industry, the graduates, to exercise their own flexibility and entrepreneurship, and just maybe look for something different, maybe just change their plan, not to just expect to go along exactly the track that they were set on, but to look wider and to look at the bigger picture.
Fantastic. And while I've got you on the hot seat there, Jane, we've had a question come in, a very practical and pragmatic one. How can we reconcile different expectations when you have guests who are being very cautious, rubbing shoulders, so to speak, with ones who are more blasé, more relaxed, and the conflict and issues that there may be? How do you see us as hoteliers fitting into that?
Yes, I mean, we see it every day just in the street, walking the dog or down in the supermarket or whatever. There's different people have different attitudes. I guess the hotelier or any hospitality operator just needs to be seen to be doing the right thing, and to have all the policies, the correct legal policies in place, and to enforce them as maybe gently, but just remind people constantly that it's their policy, what needs to be done, and then those that are more cautious will appreciate that, and those that are less cautious will maybe have a little bit of guilt and think, oh yes, I better behave a bit better in this environment. So it's just gentle reminders, I think, of those that maybe are beginning to flaunt the rules.
So you would see a role for our staff in policing, so to speak, social distancing and other considerations for the guests who are uncomfortable with the current risks to their health.
Yes, and it's a tricky position to put any member of staff in, and I think there has to be some training and support from the top downwards throughout. But yes, taking temperature on arrival, what does this member of staff actually do if somebody is displaying a temperature? And we were talking the other day about ladies of a certain age who might say, well, that's nothing to do with coronavirus, I'm just very hot today. And that would be particularly difficult for someone to deal with. So training, I think, is key. And having senior members of staff very readily available to support any junior members of staff that are having any issues.
Peter, would you like to add to that?
All I would add to that is to say it's about empowerment. And I think before these situations arise, they've got to be talked through with any member of staff who is in a guest contact position, where we say, if you see people abusing social distancing, this is how you handle it. This is how you remind them. Because as Jane says, your protocols have to be built to meet the expectations of the most concerned guest, even if the guys at the other end of the spectrum think you're being a bit of a freak about it. You've got to cater for the people who are most cautious. But it's all about empowerment and training of the staff, no doubt.
I think that answer you've just given, and Jane as well, ties in quite nicely with our next question. How do you manage to ensure hospitality is key and hygiene is given? How do you make a hotel rather than making it feel like a hospital? Did you want to, I think you've partly said that with the training and how the human interactions are handled.
Yeah, and it's also about the fact that those of us who come into the industry and stay in the industry, stay in it because we enjoy the empathy with people. We enjoy that connectivity. and the pleasure of service rather than civility, obviously. But and I think our default position, most of us working in the industry, is that we want to be hospitable. The clue's in the title, isn't it, really? I'm not worried about that so much, actually. I don't think we need to train people to be hospitable. I mean, the mantra that you always hear is that you recruit attitude and you teach skills. And if you have done that over the years and recruited people with the right attitude towards how they engage with guests, it just isn't going to be a problem. They'll adopt this new situation in a heartbeat.
I think the next one is probably more for you, Duncan. How have, sorry, just scrolling through here. With these new practices, there are costs involved to these new standards. What are your thoughts on customers and what their views are on the costs, and are they prepared to pay more if we have more costs in our business to provide these new standards? Do you have a thought on that one, Duncan?
Yeah, I think to a point. I think it's if we start out, putting our rates at the bottom of the pile, that's going to be really detrimental for the business. So we need to be a little bit cautious of that. I think customers are willing to pay for superior service, of course, and if it means, we're as an industry we need to up our cleaning game, of course, anyway. But if it means that they are going to be treated the way they want to be treated, I think people will be prepared to pay. I don't think that's changed much from the past. Yes, there's less business around, but there's different levels of business. And I do honestly think that if we provide the right service, people will pay for it.
Which links into the next question. Despite much talk about holding rate, it looks like discounting is starting to take hold. Do you want to have an opinion on that one, Duncan? And I'll give the other guys a chance to come in on that as well.
Yeah, I'd like to think it wouldn't happen, but of course everyone's desperate for business, aren't they? So it is a bit of a race to the floor, and I just hope it doesn't continue. I think we've got to start somewhere, and almost as a group of hoteliers, as a group of hospitality, say, look, as an industry, we need to just be very, very careful we're not doing ourselves massive detriment here, and just say to our customers, look, if you want this level of business, this is the kind of price level you're going to pay. If you want the lower level of business, you'll pay this. But to then start, for a luxury hotel to start taking a budget rate, I think it's scary, and I hope that doesn't happen. Of course, it's human nature to just, there's desperation-wise to go out and get what business we can, but I think we just need to be hopefully as careful as possible with that and group together as a business and not just individually swipe each other with undercutting rates.
It goes back to the old revenue management attitude of being brave, holding your rate, looking at the longer term, and what it very tempting to fill the hotel next week by discounting the rate, but the longer term view would very much be hold the rate, and then the business will come back, maybe slower, but much more surely, and the longer term view completely better. That's got to come from the owner right down to the person answering the phone and taking a reservation or setting the website rules. The long-term goal really needs to be looked at.
Peter, did you want to jump in either on the costs side or on the rate?
No, I just think that, if you are a rate historian, you'd know that in previous recessions, deep discounting gives short-term occupancy, but building the rate afterwards is enormously difficult. And I think, hopefully enough people have learnt that. The last recession was recent enough that we'll remember how long it took to build rate back again. So yeah, be tough,
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that. There's quite a few comments coming in agreeing with the earlier points on careers and the long-term view. The industry is going through short-term pain, but people need to be thinking about building a longer-term career. And as Jane was saying, being a bit more entrepreneurial to start off with. Just moving on, there's a question here about how do we expect to handle things like gyms and swimming pools? I'm not sure if anyone wants to jump in on that, but I know from a English government point of view, we're still waiting to hear, and that is not an area that is opening on the 4th of July. that is a later stage with separate guidelines. So that's the current English government view. We've got lots of questions from different countries. So I think the simple answer is you're going to have to look at a national level from one nation to another, even within the UK. Did any of you have any thoughts, particularly on things like spas and health facilities?
I think, as I mentioned in the presentation, people are crying out for spas. Of course they are, but we need to be so careful in terms of contact within those parts of the business. Gyms likewise as well. The nature of those particular areas of our businesses is that people get together. And until we got something that's solid and agreed across the board, it's very difficult to see that part opening properly. We all want it to, because we want our, our personal grooming, or whatever it is, to take place, to have that pamper factor. It's been a tough 3-4 months for everyone. So we want that to be open, but it's going to be hard to get it right and get to the point where we can really do that and say to the public, you are safe in here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be difficult because of the moist, warm conditions that you associate with spas. Worst place for bugs to grow, isn't it? Anyway, it's all going to be about confidence. Yeah.
And there's a great question here that links back, Peter, to what you were saying before. In fact, all three of you through today's session have been talking to this point about the staff. And if a guest has been reported through NHS track and trace that they have symptoms, what does that mean for our staff? And I think from conversations we've all had separately and from watching the industry, a lot of the standards that are coming out pay a lot more attention to our customers than they do to our staff. But clearly from all three of you today, you think that there's a real need for a focus in how do we look after the safety of our staff who are in contact with our customers. Did any of you want to expand on that as far as the risk to our staff and how we manage those?
Well, yeah. I know sorry, may I start?
Yes.
I know a number of businesses are trying to introduce staff bubbles where they have different teams never crossing on shift, so that if one team falls down, there is another team that can carry on. Smaller establishments, it's very difficult to do that, of course. But we've all said it all through today. We've got to look after our staff. We owe it to them. If they're putting their trust in us, we've got to repay that trust and look after them. I think if you have a guest coming in who is already showing symptoms, it's right that they shouldn't come in. That's going to be a real challenge handling that. If somebody falls ill whilst they're in the property, then they will need to self-isolate in the hotel probably, which means room service, disposable cutlery and crockery, and food left outside their room. That, I understand, is the latest government guideline on that particular situation.
Yes, I read that they were due to stay in their room, but then when they could travel back to their own home safely, I think is the way to do it. And I guess it's going to come back to trust, which is the whole topic of today's conversation. But trust with staff. If somebody feels that they looked after one particular a guest who fell ill, then they perhaps should just be given the next 14 days off to self-isolate. But it does come down to trust, which obviously works two ways, from the employer to the team member, and then from the team member back up the chain, that they are only going to take that time off if they genuinely feel that they put themselves at risk by dealing with that guest. It's trust, trust, trust.
All the way.
Yeah, I liken it a little bit to, sorry, Michael, I liken it a little bit to my daughter's going back to school next week, and she's 8, and we as parents have to trust that she's going to be safe there. And I guess have to also trust that our staff are safe, and staff have to trust that we as providers have made a safe environment for them. So I know the theme of this whole presentation and session today is about trust, but it truly is. I'm happy to let my daughter go to school, the most precious thing in the world, then we've got to, as a business, we've got to almost have that much, have our staff having that much trust in us, that they will come and do their job properly and make the guests welcome and look after them properly as well.
Fantastic. Just one last question for this stage of our conversation, and then we'll move on to the closing points. And if there's time for a couple more questions at the end, I'll throw them in there. But we've got a question here from Darren. Many international operators have put detailed hygiene plans in place. Do you think there's a role for third-party accreditation agencies, consultants providing certification for businesses and buildings? Jane, would you like to start with that one?
I think the one that I know that Peter and the Institute of Hospitality have supported, and a lot of the industry associations, the Service Department, ASAP, have supported it, is the AA Confident, COVID Confident, which is all about cleaning standards. And I think you mentioned that Visit Britain are coming out with their guidelines soon as well. There have been so many people involved in this cleaning aspect. And as was said earlier, we were already a fairly clean industry anyway, or a very clean industry. I think the AA policy will be a great one for accreditation to see us through. The Visit Britain one will maybe put that confidence out into the general public as well. Cleaning is going to be key, and real cleaning, and also showing that it's being cleaned as well. And there's lots of different ways of doing that. It's not just a question of spraying disinfectant and wiping it down. There's lots of other options as well, but that's a whole different topic as well, a whole topic in itself.
Sounds like another webinar there. Peter, would you like to build on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's important to have protocols. What I would say, though, is that, you know, we know the international brands don't like external accreditations. They think they have the ability within themselves to self-regulate. I was talking to some guys at Hilton yesterday about the Clean Stay program. Hilton Clean Stay, I'm sure, satisfies any criteria, and the brands will expect people to believe in them and trust the brand. So I think accreditation is great. It's going to be a massive benefit for independent operators and small businesses, but I think the global brands will continue, as they always do, to paddle their own canoes.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Peter. Duncan, your thoughts, and perhaps you would like to move on to the next point after that.
Yeah, I think pretty much the same as what Peter and James just said. Actually, I think the brands will do their own thing. They have teams in place to do that sort of process and stick to their guns on that. But like you say, the independents of the world, to have that accreditation will be a huge boost. I think it's vital to do it. But like you say, the brands will carry on and do their own thing. I like the paddling their own canoes scenario though. That's good. Just moving on then quickly, when my screen comes back. There we go. So we have a couple of ebooks that are available for you to take on board. They go through actionable steps to build your crisis recovery plan while understanding what motivates future guests and employees. We do have one for operations, which you can download from our website. You can take that from the HOSPA site, from IOH as well. You know, it's available via these online resources. We do have other ones that we can look at too. We've got ebooks around revenue, sales, marketing, those aspects as well that you can certainly download. But these are available for you to take on board. And feel free to contact myself or Jane or Peter and go ahead and download for your own perusal.
Fantastic. So we do have a bit of time left then. That's partly the answer to the question on standards. And I think from what you've heard from all of our panelists today, it's clear that there are a lot of standards. From what I've seen, one of the challenges with the international standards, like as Peter was suggesting, the Hilton standard, it is an international standard. While the response to the COVID situation has been very different from nation to nation, and even here in the UK within the devolved nations. So one of the things that I think needs to be considered as we have such an international audience today is that we're primarily talking about the situation in UK and even more focused into England, but we've got comments coming in from Spain and other parts of the world. The principles of what we're talking about today apply quite broadly. but the specifics of it, you really need to be aware of your situation in your country. Peter, did you want to build on that at all or expand on that?
Well, no, I just think that, you know, certainly once quarantine is eased here, so international travel will happen. I think as businesses serving international guests, we need to meet the expectations of the most concerned international guests, rather than whatever the highest level is in our country. We need to aim for satisfying and giving comfort to anybody from anywhere in the world. So we need to work to the highest possible level wherever we are.
And the quarantine, the 14-day, there is sort of talk about that being relaxed as well. So great for the UK businesses or the local businesses when they're getting the local staycation activity. But the London properties, as was mentioned in the meetings and events discussion, they're desperate for the international business. So we need that quarantine relaxed as soon as it is safe to do so as well. That will make a big difference.
That links to the next question. How can we as an industry push the government for further help to the hospitality sector with further support, as we're the most affected sector? I think a big part of it, as you said, Jane, we need that 14-day quarantine addressed. We've asked for the 2 meters distancing to be addressed, and it has been. Did you want to expand on what you're aware of is being done by your associations?
I think we're both relying quite heavily on UK Hospitality and Kate Nichols as our lobbying people for hospitality and government, and she's doing a great job doing that. I know there are thoughts about the VAT rate, which is something that UK Hospitality and the BHA before it were always trying to get a reduced VAT rate for hospitality businesses. And there have been murmurs and discussions about that being up for discussion. So I think it's wait and see, watch this space.
Thank you, Peter. Final point from you?
Well, first and foremost, I totally agree. I think the role of bodies like the Institute or HOSPA is very much to support UK hospitality and channel with them. If it's a closing point that you want from me, I just want to say how great I think it is that Amadeus are taking these initiatives and making a real contribution supporting the industry. So Duncan, thanks to you and your team for that. I think it's a massive exercise and well done. That's what I want to say.
Thank you very much. You're extremely welcome. We enjoy doing it.
Good.
Excellent. Well, we are coming up to time, so I will just wrap up with some closing comments there. Duncan, from you?
Just to say thank you all for spending the time to listen to us. I think it's such a key area for us to look at, for us to get right. We don't have a huge amount of time to get it right either. It's just because it's all about building the business up. But I think if we all work together, work as one, I mentioned how hospitality as a business working together on rates, for example. I think if we stick together as a sort of a unit, we have a lot of chance to succeed and get back to levels we were at. Not this year, but maybe the end of next year. It's such a shifting sand at the moment that it's difficult to predict, but I think there's positive coming, and I'm looking forward and looking up.
Excellent, thank you. And Jane? Oh, I think you're on mute.
I think as I've tried to stay throughout, it's. Oh, am I? Oh,
carry on.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, stay positive, remain positive. There was great news yesterday. There's great news coming with once the properties are all reopened. I think keep that smile on your face, and stay positive. And we will come back. Hospitality will be a great industry once again, and it's up to us to make sure that happens.
Excellent, thank you all. Well, I do have to just do the usual caveat at the end here. The advice and opinions shared this morning are general and should not be assumed to be right for every situation. Each business is unique and the position is changing day by day. If you need formal advice, please feel free to contact Jane, Peter, Duncan, or myself, and we can put you in touch with experts in many areas of hospitality. A huge thank you to Duncan, Jessica, and Anna, and all the team at Amadeus for putting together the information for this webinar today. Thanks also to Peter and the Institute of Hospitality for hosting this event with us at HOSPA today. This spirit of collaboration, I think, between HOSPA and the Institute of Hospitality really is what our industry needs to get back on its feet. So do visit the HOSPA website to see our crisis support page, also the positive news that we're posting during this time. We've added a reopening section, which is being populated as new advice emerges. And you can also find recordings of recent webinars with a summary of key points. This one will be uploaded in the next 24 hours or so. Thank you all very much indeed, and we look forward to seeing you soon.